It is time now. Nick Harris, Fort Worth Star-Telegram, joining us. Nick, on his alleged off day, I think he's already done one interview. He'll be with me. Then he has to do another podcast, Nick. So the grind never stops. But nice to get just a little bit of a mini break right out of the chute after a long training camp and everything. And the Cowboys. That isn't it interesting when they lose, and so there's the negative side of that. Yet they played well enough to kind of give the fans hope. And boy, back when I was doing the show with Galloway in the day, we had a name for it, like moral victories. It was like I think it was like a loss win, we would call it. But there were enough things that happened that were positive that seemingly they can build on some of those things. What as they turned the page now. You heard from Schottenheimer yesterday. What seems to be the theme, and what's the biggest point of emphasis this week as they get ready for the Giants?
To that point, Matt, I am 90% of the time not a believer in moral victories. I don't think those exist. The loss in the loss column still counts the same as the 41-7 and 34-6 beatdowns they took to Philadelphia last year. It still counts the same. But overall, I think in this particular case, I think this might be where the 10% comes into play for me. I think there is a moral victory you could take out of this week one loss. To be within 4 points of that team, sure, you had opportunities to win that game. CeeDee Lamb's drops, Miles Sanders fumble. If you take a few of those things away, that's a much different result. But I think, you talk to this team, Schottenheimer was very he emphasized quite a bit that he does not believe in moral victories, that they have to win at the end of the day. But I think there is a lot of energy coming out of that game. Compared to what it could have been, had the Eagles covered, let's say that, it would have been much different feeling in that locker room after the game, a much different feeling in Frisco yesterday walking around. They feel pretty good about this team, but they felt pretty good about this team coming in. And I think it's starting to kind of strengthen that belief as they move forward into the year.
It was interesting. We always love that first Sunday of the NFL. But there was something about, and it's not like the first time we've watched a former Cowboys player, but I can't quite remember like with this much anticipation. Like even when Zeke went to the Patriots and other things like that, when waiting for Micah to come into that game the other day for the Packers. And I get it. You hear from fans both when you do your podcast and you're writing for the Star-Telegram, like, hey, let's move on. And there's probably even part of you that's a little sick of the Micah thing. It was like every day of coverage at training camp. But you also know with him coming back, the story is going to kind of hang around. Yeah. And whether it's Kenny Clark for the Cowboys or Micah, there's just this cloud or this story's not going to go away. What was it like for you to somebody that you thought was going to be the star player for the Cowboys for so long, to see him for the first time in an opposing uniform? And because it's funny, you kind of think what it might feel like, but you having been around the team now every day for several years and been around Micah and gotten to know him, what was that experience like for you? And what did you think of his first game performance for the Packers?
It was weird. It was definitely weird seeing him in that green and gold. It's not something that you expected coming into the year, and much less coming out of the season last year. You think about that Washington Week 18 performance he had last year. I think he had 2 sacks in that game. And it ended up being the final game he played as a Cowboy. And if you had told me that when we walked out of AT&T Stadium that day, I would have said you were crazy. And, here we are. It was definitely strange, and he had limited opportunities in his first game with the Packers. He's still ramping back up to play speed. You could see that, but you could also see the type of impact that he is going to have in that pass rush for Green Bay. I will say it was interesting when I was talking to beat reporters that cover the Packers right after this trade happened, and they were saying, man, this is going to be a huge addition to the pass rush. They've had issues at times getting to the quarterback. This is really going to be able to help that. But at the same time, man, it's a big loss losing Kenny Clark. And I wonder how they can fill that run game. And so, they didn't have any issues in the run game against Detroit, against that really talented running back tandem of David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. They held them pretty quietly. I'm going to be keeping an eye on that as the season goes on. But if you're asking me, this defense for the Packers is 1-for-1 with Micah Parsons.
Yeah, watching him track down Goff and then just watch, you're reminded of the fun, like he's just a beast. It's just like the combination of that much power and that much speed. And Nick, earlier today you were monitoring. You all always do a great job of this. So Jerry speaks so much. You got to kind of be, nimble, right? And you got to account for everything he's saying out there. But I did get a kick out of him saying something like, his back looked like he was holding up pretty well. And he said, I say that with a straight face, which when Jerry says, and I'm not trying to be triter, I say that with a straight face, he's admitting he's taken a little poke is what it seemed like to me. I saw your quotes about it. I didn't hear Jerry actually say it live, but to me, it sounded like a little playful poke at Micah.
Yeah, it was. There's no way anybody could say it with a straight face, right? Just because that was the quote-unquote excuse at training camp. But he didn't break. I guess his voice inflection did not change when he was saying that. He was saying, "Yeah, his back looked great." I say that with a straight face, and he just kept rolling. But overall, we'll see what that back looks like in Week 4. It is quickly approaching.
Okay, and just monitoring what Schottenheimer is most focused on this week. If you think about it, the opponent, and you can only control your own team, but it's hard not to see, you got the Giants already all hell breaking loose. Who's going to be their quarterback moving forward? It's not often we think of the Cowboys as like the picture of stability, but in comparison to some teams, they sort of are. What do you think? And I thought that was interesting. Brian said something about what did he say? The Marty rule is midnight, but that game the other night, because of the weather delay, they played so late, so they didn't have the midnight rule. So we're starting to see, as he gets into the season, wouldn't it be interesting, Nick, you got in this pace with him, this head coach, during training camp, and you sort of know what he's like, but you don't truly get to know a head coach until they get a couple of black eyes, or you struggle during the season and see what they're like. So far, it seems like Schottenheimer's going to be really consistent and really process-oriented. I guess I would say that part of who he is, like Dak really seems to be leaning into, he likes. So far, so good, right? As far as the players sort of buying into his approach.
Yeah, one thing I'll say about Brian Schottenheimer, I did this article in the Star Telegram Quick Pub last week, and I talked to all the head coaches that he has worked under in his NFL career, or all the ones that are still with us. And Dan Quinn mentioned, had a quote in there that I thought was really representative of Brian Schottenheimer and kind of the guy that we've gotten to know over the course of the last few months. And he said he has a really strong inner game. He's been through it all. He understands what it looks like. Nothing is going to take him off guard. And when I was talking to Bill Cowher mentioned the Micah Parsons situation. He's like, you see how he's handled that situation with grace. He's handled it with step-by-step. Not one time at training camp, every day he was asked about Micah Parsons. Not one time did it look like it was affecting him or, bugging him. He understands the business, and I think he gets it. That's not only a product of him being Marty Schottenheimer's kid, but it's also a product of him being in coaching for 28 years, and he understands it. So, when that adversity comes around, I'm with you, Matt. I am curious to see how he responds. You have the culture building that you do in the off season. You have the ping pong table in the locker room or whatever the hell. And what happens when you lose 4 games in 5 weeks? What happens with that? Does the ping pong table stay in the locker room, or do you put books in the locker room? What changes? And so I am curious to see how Schottenheimer does attack some of the adversity that, will certainly come at some point this year. It's a tough schedule. It's going to happen where they lose a couple in a row that, maybe that they shouldn't. But, until then, I think what he has done so far, how he has approached, this first loss against the Eagles, it's been pretty standard of what we'd expect from him.
Okay, and you guys asked him about George Pickens and his relatively small part in that game plan, it would seem. At least Dak didn't go his way a lot. I think historically, he's a guy you can kind of throw to in traffic. You let him go make a play. From the way Schottenheimer answered that, do you think that'll be a point of emphasis moving forward? Hey, we need to continue to get in. By the way, you see the good and bad, don't you? It's like players show who they are. Like he made that one great play away from his body with his hands, and he kind of came back and made the play on the ball. And then he makes the play where he throws a dude down and gets a unsportsmanlike penalty. You saw it with like Jalen Ramsey. I mean, getting in a fight during a game, and again, maybe sometimes people feed off those kinds of things, but those, you are who you are, and those things kind of follow you around. And I think Pickens has to remember the officials know about his reputation for like how he behaves on the field and all of that. All that aside, though, do you kind of feel like the Cowboys are going to make that a real point of emphasis to get him even more involved?
Yeah, I think it will happen in week 2. Going into week 1, they were really trying to attack that cornerback 2 for the Philadelphia Eagles. It started out as a Dory Jackson. It ended up being DeCorian Bennett after Jackson got hurt. And that's why I think you saw so much CD production, is because he was the one that was matched up against that CB2 most of the time. And whenever Quinyon Mitchell was over on George Pickens, then they looked away from him. You could see Dak's reads not even accounting for George Pickens at times whenever Quinyon Mitchell was lined up against him. I don't know if it was necessarily a game plan thing, because I think there were some issues that George Pickens had with effort in that game against the Eagles. There were some times where he knew that the ball was not coming to him, and whether it be blocking or, route running, deceive route running, he wasn't putting enough on film that I thought really could have, affected the receiving game as a whole. But I think you can expect more production out of him going into week 2. It is a bad secondary for the Giants. I mean, they've added Paulson Adebo, but it feels like every time they try to patch up that secondary issue with a Band-Aid, it somehow extenuates and gets worse. And that was kind of the issues that you saw against the Commanders with them as well. So I'm curious to see what his production looks like going into week 2. I think it will be stronger.
Yeah, and a guy in a contract year, like, that's the last thing you expect to be saying after week 1, that he put some weird things on film as far as effort is concerned. And let's not act like Mike Tomlin wasn't asked about very similar things. Now, again, does that define his whole season? No, it doesn't, but it's something that bears watching. Nick Harris from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram joining us on the Matt Mosley Show, Rogue Media Network. And Nick, I think Dak impressed a lot of people. I think when you have as many different sort of injuries as he's had over the years, you watch some of these other quarterbacks, even McCarthy, last night. I mean, certainly Allen and Lamar Jackson put on a show the other night. But like, one of the things we're looking for from Dak at age 32 is like movement in the pocket. And I thought that was a good sign the other night, that he wasn't, barely sacked at all. And even that time, he saved his team like 13 yards by escaping the pocket. Again, he's probably moved out of the time, kind of like Rodgers did, like in terms of that he's going to really hurt a team with his legs. But his ability to move in the pocket and escape and buy himself time, I think that's very, very important. And we saw some really good signs in that area against the Eagles.
Yeah, very encouraging. And I think about the play where he shed Jordan Davis off of his back, and that's probably the one you're talking about, and he was able to roll to the left and find a receiver downfield. That was big. That's big to see, especially coming out of this first game. It's the first time we've seen Dak Prescott since he tore that hamstring last year against Atlanta, and you wonder about the mobility issues. And especially, Mike McCarthy said last week on the Pat McAfee show, I guess he's doing a weekly hit or whatever these days, and he had mentioned that, coming into this big contract for Dak Prescott, there was kind of an intentional effort around, limiting his mobility. It's because he's going to have to last throughout the duration of this contract. That was the first time anyone actually ever admitted it, because it was all evident on film. You saw it in the first 8 weeks of the season last year. Dak's legs were considerably down compared to his first 8 seasons in the league. And so, it was good to see him using his legs on Thursday night. He even had a little scamper outside of the pocket and picked up some positive yardage. He looked a little slow. Don't get me wrong. He looked 32, but it was good to see his legs out and active and in space. That's going to be needed for this offense. If he's not using his legs, then this offense is not at 100% full potential, because when they are working off schedule, when they are working off script, that's when you really can, dive into the intricacies of CeeDee Lamb's game, of George Pickens' game, when they're able to work off schedule with Dak's legs. I think that's going to benefit them a whole ton.
Let me ask you about two players, because you've watched these stories pretty closely. Mosley Smith, there seems to be an indication that nothing's going to change with him, and he's going to continue to be inactive. I mean, that's an interesting story to track because he's a former first-round pick. And the other one is Jaden Blue, who there seems to be some thought that he could bring some juice, he could bring some speed, could be a very nice change of pace with the offense. But it's been suggested the consistency hasn't been there. And Schottenheimer's been upfront about that. If our whole thing's going to be about competition and you don't compete or you're not consistent, then I can't put you out there. And you can start with Mozzie. Where do you see this thing heading? And to me, it almost seems like if you're not going to play him, you got to start thinking about trying to get something for him. Is this sending a message with the hope that you can get something out of him, or is this setting up a trade situation? Where are you on Mozzie, and then where do you think things are with Jaden Blue?
Yeah, I'll start with Mozzie as far as trade value goes. I'm not sure you could get a whole lot for him at this point. And it's because he's had so many opportunities to put things on film. There have been public questions about his effort and his intention in the game and what he does behind the scenes. With all those questions abound and the film that he's put on tape, I'm not sure you could get a whole lot for him. I mean, maybe like a conditional 6th or a conditional 7th on the condition that he does actually play for a new team. But even on that same token, they do need the defensive tackle depth. Let's say Kenny Clark gets hurt, they are going to need Mozzie Smith. And that's the unfortunate reality of it. That's the unfortunate reality of that room that they've built at that one tech position. But I think with him, it's his leash is running out. And I don't think there is anything that Mozzie Smith can do that he hasn't already done. And I think there was hope going into the year, like, hey, okay, look, new system might be able to benefit him. Eberflus has done well with these defensive tackles in the past. Let's see if this works. And it didn't. And you saw that when he was playing well into the final preseason game, into the second half. And that spoke to the questions that this staff had about Mozzie Smith during training camp and the preseason. And then when he was on the inactive list, I think that just spoke to it a little bit more. On Jaden Blue's case, they want to see consistency out of him. Brian Schottenheimer said it pretty bluntly yesterday in the press conference. And, it was interesting because right around 53-man cut down time, I had someone in the building tell me, hey, Jaden Blue needs to have a good game in this final preseason game. And I was like, really? I kind of figured him as a roster lock. And I don't think it was necessarily he was on the cut line. I think it was more so like, hey, he's not this shoe-in RB2 or this shoe-in guy that's going to get 10 touches a game. I don't think I took that into account probably as strong as I should have, because then when that inactive list came out on Thursday night and Jaden Blue was on it, I thought back to that conversation and I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense a little bit. And so the consistency has been the big thing that's been talked about behind the scenes and now in the public by Brian Schottenheimer as far as what they want to see out of Jaden Blue. Does he get that opportunity this week? I don't think so, but I think he will get his opportunity. It's just a matter of when.
Do you think in these early days that Jerry's going to come out of every game telling us that Kenny Clark was the highest graded player?
yeah, he's going to be they're going to get 300 yards put on them on the ground one time this year. He's going to be like, look, but Kenny Clark, he was in there. He was making it happen.
Kenny was right where he needed to be. Yeah, the whole time. Well, and you always love the draft as well. And y'all do a great job, and you look at the film and break all that down. So you have one eye over on that. I've got a big Baylor audience, and the Bears took down SMU the other day. I know you had a lot going on this weekend. That was over on the CW. I know you love some of the shows on the CW, so maybe you had that thing on autoplay. But Sawyer Robertson just got named earlier today AP Player of the Week. Danny Cannell actually said right now he's maybe the best quarterback in the country, sort of the way he's playing. You know how this goes. From a Heisman standpoint, whether it be John Mateer, there's going to be some more blue blood type quarterbacks that probably get a little more push. But from what you've seen, obviously he had a really good run last year. And then he's off to a very hot start this year in games against Auburn and the big comeback win against SMU. Have you started to form an opinion on Sawyer Robertson, knowing kind of how he's played for Baylor?
It's always funny talking to draft analysts in like July because everyone has their guy, quote unquote, that they think is going to have a big year, and start getting into the first, second round conversations. The one that was probably more used than not was Fernando Mendoza out of Indiana. And that was one that I was like, I don't get it. But Sawyer Robertson, I get that. And you hear Sawyer Robertson from a few guys, and those few guys are starting to get a little bit louder now. I've been a Sawyer Robertson guy personally. I thought that this system at Baylor this year was really going to be able to benefit him, returning some of the talent that they had from last year. Josh Cameron being a big one in that receiving game that I think really helps out Sawyer Robertson in the short to intermediate game. I like what Sawyer Robertson does. I love his poise. I covered him at Lubbock Coronado when he was a prospect coming out. And, Texas got involved with him late, but, Baylor was eventually when he hopped in the portal was the place that he wanted to end up going to. So I think with Sawyer Robertson, seeing that performance he had against Kevin Jennings, in comparison to the performance that John Mateer and Josh Hoover have had over the course of the last couple of weeks, it was really encouraging to see, and I think it's a strong start to the year for Robertson. I want to see him build consistency because that was the big thing you talk about with him last year, right? Is that okay? Yes, this is a good game, but then he would dip down, in the next week. So I want to see the consistency out of Sawyer Robertson, but I am very excited to see what he's going to look like in Big 12 play because there's some interesting quarterbacks that he'll have to go head to head with.
Yeah, and in fact, I don't know where the Cowboys are that weekend, but if the Cowboys are in town, maybe you can see Hoover and Sawyer right up there in your backyard, and that would be fun. I did want to mention, because you have a love like I do for high school football, the passing of G.A. Moore on Friday at age 86. And I mean, other than Gordon Wood at Brownwood was amazing. I have his book signed, and I cherish that. And having met him at some point, and then GA, Nick Coach Moore. His best friend is my great uncle Don Hendricks, who Don's 91 now. GA, I believe, died at the age of 86, but just we kind of, these guys are legendary. But there was a quality to G.A. Moore that he kind of had that John Wayne. He didn't really have to shout or holler or he was kind of that throwback, whether it be Bear Bryant or Tom Landry or something, of just, I think he could just glare at you. Yeah. And you got it. And so the fact that he won all the state titles at Salina, I think maybe 5 there, won a couple more at his alma mater, Pilot Point. Those two towns are right next to each other. And then at some point went over and helped Sherman, a larger school at that time. It's just fascinating, these guys' careers. And so I thought that was a major passing that we had in high school football. And I mean, there just aren't many of those out there.
Yeah, the Texas high school football landscape lost a legend last week for sure. 8 state titles. You mentioned all of his accolades at Pilot Point and Salina, and bringing both of those programs to the statewide spotlight, even Salina to the national spotlight back in the 80s and 90s. And that was really crucial for that program. And you see what they've built in the years since, and they've been able to get back to that state title stage this past season with Bo Bentley at quarterback. So it's G.A. Moore. I mean, when you talk to coaches at the Texas High School Coaches Convention every summer in San Antonio, and you just talk to them about influences, G.A. Moore gets brought up so much to these guys, even guys that are my age, 20s, 30s. There is still influence there that G.A. Moore has left and kept around the game. I was able to meet him a few years back when Phil Danaher took the all-time Texas high school football wins lead away from him. Phil Danaher was the head coach at Corpus Christi Cal Allen for so long and retired a couple of years ago. But G.A. Moore was able to attend that game where he saw his record fall. And so always a good man, and certainly revered here in the North Texas community, but overall in the Texas high school football community.
429 wins, and think what he lived to see. Salina, as you said, become sort of a, they have like breweries and nice restaurants and everything out there, right? And Prosper, which used to be tiny like that, is now massive, big time Class 6A football. It is remarkable. Well, listen, Nick, look forward to seeing you at the game Sunday. I'll be at Baylor Samford on Saturday. Put some eyes on the Heisman hopeful Sawyer Robertson, and then I'll come watch the Giants, and we'll see. I mean, it is kind of. I mean, it's funny a little bit, but also kind of sad to watch week one of an NFL season, and we see this in college football too. Right now, we're seeing it with the Florida Gators, right? Like, you already see coaches and you're like, that guy has no chance to make it either to the end of the season or he will get fired for sure.
Yeah.
And this Daboll thing seems a little bit like that. And I always find myself looking back and going, why did you keep him? Like, why? It's not like it's a buyout situation. It's not like a college buyout. It's like, if you kind of saw it going this way, like, why in the world did you not get at least a start? Because at least with a new regime, you have, like, even in Chicago, even as bad as that fourth quarter meltdown must have felt, I probably they saw enough to give them some hope moving forward last night.
Yeah, and I think with Daboll, I'm with you there. When your star receiver is beefing with you on the sideline in week one, it's never a good sign. It's never a good sign. So Daboll needs some wins, and he needs them quick. Sounds like Russell Wilson is getting the start on Sunday. I think that benefits this Cowboys defensive system. Obviously Schottenheimer has the experience with Russell Wilson. I think Jackson Dart brings a level of unknown that would have been a little bit of difficult to game plan for. But overall, I think the Cowboys get this done, and I think they cover the 5.5 point spread as it sits right now.
All right, Nick, I appreciate it. And man, I'll be out at Friday Night Football, Lake Highlands Flower Mound. So if you're looking for something Friday night, sounds like you've had a loved one just enter the Metroplex, so you may have your mind on other things, which is I think that's a great thing. But if you really want to see a spectacular couple of quarterbacks and group of wide receivers, Lake Highlands at Flower Mound. I may even get Todd Archer out there. You never know. I think that's his daughter's alma mater. So anyway, thank you, Nick. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it, Matt.
Nick Harris from the Fort Worth Star Telegram joining the Matt Mosley Show.